Hey, Raymond here from the Beginner Photography Podcast, and my favorite movie growing up was Ghostbusters 2. Let's get into today's interview.
Welcome to the Beginner Photography Podcast with Raymond Hatfield, the podcast dedicated to interviewing world-class photographers to ask them the questions you want answered. Whether you want to be the world's best wedding photographer, family photographer, pet photographer, or you just want to take better photos of your kids growing up, we will get you to start taking better photos today. Here with you as always, husband, father, home brewer, LA Dodgers fan, and award-winning Indianapolis wedding photographer, Raymond Hatfield.
Welcome one, welcome all to the Beginner Photography Podcast. Thank you so much for joining me this week. I am incredibly excited for this week's episode. This past week in my life has been kind of very busy and very hectic. At the beginning of this year, I really started putting plans in place to kind of take a load off of my schedule with running a full-time photography business as well as this podcast. I kind of needed something to give. There was a bit of pressure starting to build up that I needed to be released, and that is in the form of delegation. So in the beginning of this year, I really sat down and wrote down exactly what were the most important parts of my photography business. Like what was working, what was getting me leads, what was booking me weddings, what was making me successful. And then the same thing with the podcast. Where did I want the podcast to go? Or where do I want the podcast to go? How can I provide as much value to you, the listeners, as possible without just driving myself absolutely crazy? And I wrote down everything and it looked like, hey, great, this looks wonderful. I can absolutely tackle this. So I started doing these things, these tasks every day, and then suddenly, as I was doing them, my regular life started to kind of come in, take over, and remind me that a plan doesn't always work out the way that you hope that it does. So once again, I feel like I'm back in the spot of like, oh my gosh, I have so much going on right now. And I really need to sit down once again, figure out exactly what needs to be done. But this time through the lens of knowing where I'm at, how I got to here, and how it can be different. Because I'm trying out a few new things too. So I just want you to know that if you're listening, that things are always changing, right? You may have this plan that you're going to do X, Y, and Z to get to wherever you want to go, and you will find along the way that it is not always the case. So I hope that that's a little bit of motivation that can kind of keep you going today. And I bring this up because last time, 6-7 months ago, I don't remember, we moved into this house that we're currently in. And when we did that, there was a lapse in the podcast. I struggled, mainly because of a change of closing dates and finances from the person buying our house changed. And therefore, I didn't want to schedule any podcasts while we were moving. But it ran out the clock, and then I didn't have any podcasts for like a month. And it was terrible. I felt really bad, because the entire time I was getting emails from you, the listeners, wondering, hey, what happened to the podcast? Like, tell me that you didn't go away. And it didn't go away. I just failed to prepare for the future. And now, even though we just moved into this house less than a year ago, we're closing on another house this week. We're just not happy in this neighborhood, so we're moving back to our old neighborhood, believe it or not. And I'm just doing everything that I can now. This whole week is just jam-packed of so much stuff that needs to get done in order to make sure that there is no lapse in the podcast. And I woke up this morning feeling overwhelmed and kind of stressed out with how much needed to get done. And then preparing for this this introduction that I'm giving right now, I wanted to check iTunes because I love to showcase new reviews. And holy cow, my whole outlook on the day completely changed. I woke up, kind of felt stressed, felt behind, like there was so much on my plate. And then I read this review from iTunes user DCK, and he says, or she says, I'm actually not sure who it is. I'm just starting out on my journey into photography. I know next to nothing about photography, but this podcast has truly opened up my eyes to the world of photography. It has given me the motivation to continue learning and growing my photography skills. I'm truly thankful to have found this podcast. Thank you for all that you do. And reading a review like that, man, it just really puts a fire under me to say, like, this is exactly why I'm doing what I'm doing. And all of this that I've put on my plate for this week is exactly for this reason, right? Because I don't want that lapse again. I want to continue to provide value in a way that doesn't overload everything else that's going on in my life, because I don't live to work, I work to live. So the work that I do, I want it to push me forward in my life, to better myself. But I want to do that through helping others. And that is you, the listeners, to learn more about photography. So reading that review really means the world to me, and it was exactly what I needed today. So I truly appreciate every new review. So if you get any sort of value out of this podcast at all whatsoever, I would be so incredibly thankful if you could just take 30 seconds. You know, if you're in the podcast app on your iPhone, you can just click through and leave a review right there. Any sort of honest review, I would be so thankful for. It really does mean the world to me, and it really keeps me going in mornings like this. So that's all that we got. We're going to get into today's interview, and it is one that a lot of you are going to find value in. It is with Courtney Slazinik, and she is the owner and creator of the blog Click It Up a Notch, which is all about helping beginners just like you learn more about photography. They have a lot of great blog posts, and she also has a freebie download which you'll hear about towards the end of the interview. So if you want to find out about it, it's a good one. Go ahead and listen all the way to the end. I was going somewhere else with that, but I forgot where I was going. I need some coffee, so screw it. We're just gonna get right on into today's interview with Courtney Slazinik. Today's guest is Courtney Slazinik, an ex-teacher turned photographer who now runs the popular photography blog Click It Up a Notch, which Huffington Post named one of the top 5 blogs for momtographers. So Courtney, thank you so much for coming on the Beginner Photography Podcast.
Yeah, I'm so excited. Thanks for having me. I love talking photography. You're going to have to kick me off.
Well, we've had a lot of interviews go on for way longer than they should have gone. So I'll make sure that we don't do that. I know that your time is very valuable. So I do want to thank you, obviously, for coming on. And I'm excited to get into this. But as I mentioned there, in your introduction, you started off as a teacher. Is that right? Tell me about your journey and how did you kind of fall into photography?
Yeah, so I was that kid who in kindergarten knew I wanted to be an elementary school teacher. I asked the teachers for all their supplies at the end of the year. I played school with my friends. I went to college. I went into, the very first day, and I was like, give me the track. I'm going to be an elementary school teacher. And I was in the door and out. And that was always my love and my dream. And I love teaching. And I also knew, though, that I wanted to teach and then I wanted to stay home with my kids. And so
yeah, that's a hard mix.
Yes. And so after I got married, I taught for a couple years. And then we had our first daughter. And so I quit teaching and I stayed home. And then we had our second daughter. And around the time that our second daughter was I got into photography. I always loved it. I feel like a lot of us, especially who kind of become obsessed, are like, oh, it's always the person with the camera, right? And we just didn't know what to do with it. And so I had a really nice point and shoot when we first got married. My husband gave it to me for my birthday, and I thought it was like the end all be all. And I started taking all these pictures, and I realized they didn't look as great as everyone else's. And this was like pre-Facebook. And we didn't have social media back then. That's how old I am. And, and I started realizing I did want a DSLR, and we were young and didn't have a ton of money. And so it wasn't a huge priority for us. And when I was about to give birth to my second daughter, I'm talking 10 minutes away from giving birth, the nurse asked my husband to move this chair, and neither one of us realized the camera was on the chair. And, he's excited and nervous, and he moved it and accidentally broke the camera. It dropped and shattered. And we both kind of looked at each other like, was that the camera? And luckily, my mom and my sister were there and they had cameras. And so we were fine. We got the birth photograph. But I am like an amazing wife. And so I took advantage of my husband's guilt. And I was like, it's day 2 in the hospital. You know, I've got this brand new baby. And he is like, I'm going to go get you some lunch. And I was like, okay, great. I want this. And then I've already called the camera store. So just go by, pick up the camera, and then come back. And so I bought what my sister had. I didn't do any research. I was like, what do you have? That looks good. I bought it. And I started taking pictures. And obviously there was a big change between like the point and shoot and the DSLR, but they still weren't as good as like another friend of mine who's showing me her pictures and with a DSLR. And I ended up figuring out, I made her like teach me everything she knew, and I made her come to my house, and I realized that there was this world of photography, and I became obsessed with it and like learning how to photograph my kids, because at the time I had 2, now I've got 3, and I started at 365 and I took a picture every day for a year and I loved it, and that was like 8 years ago and I haven't stopped. I mean, I've stopped my 365.
Yeah.
I'm not crazy.
Yeah, I'd have to do the math to figure out how many days are in 8 years. But
oh my gosh.
So there was a lot there, obviously. So when you first, I want to hear about that first struggle when you first got that DSLR in your hand. Obviously, you're super excited about this. Were you assuming that automatically the camera would just start taking better photos? Is that it?
Well, yeah, wasn't it supposed to? Why did I spend several $100s on this camera? Like, that's the point, right? You just get the gear and you get the great shots. And I mean, I tell people all the time, so many of us believe that. And I mean, over time you realize that's not the case, but I genuinely thought, like, I have the nice camera. Why aren't I getting the nice shots? And I can still remember the photo my friend had. It was her son sitting on a bench. We look at it now, we both kind of laugh, because now looking back, it's not this amazing photo. But at the time, it was this incredible photo because her son was in focus and the background was blurry.
Oh,
and I was like, how in the world? Like, I could not do that. That was the moment. And I still tell, she's been my mentor and one of my dearest friends for, years. And I'm like, that was the photo. Like, her taking that photo was what made me realize, like, okay, there's something more to this that I'm not getting it, and it's not just the camera. I'm going to have to figure out how to do this.
Of course. Yeah, I know that totally makes sense. So tell me a little bit more about that progression. You said that obviously you reached out to her and you're like, teach me everything that you know. I'm sure that was probably I don't want to say a hard decision, but like a big time investment on her part to start teaching you photography. Is she a photographer, or was there any other resources involved? How did that go?
Yeah, so we are both military spouses, and at the time we were living in Spokane, Washington, and I saw that her photos were better than mine, and I said, you got to come over to my house and you have to show me how. And she's an incredible teacher. Her name is Megan Saloa, and I still call her up all the time and make her teach me stuff. But she's so patient and kind, and she's in my living room trying to explain ISO to me, and she's explaining this exposure triangle and how they all work together. And photography is not easy for me. And so I am like, nothing you're saying is making sense.
Yeah, are these actual words?
Like, yeah, I'm like, I don't understand. And she's so patient and so kind. I remember getting so frustrated. I threw my camera on the couch and I'm like, I'm never going to get this. I was so frustrated. Of course, then we just hung out and she continued to be patient and teach me. And I became like obsessed with Googling and figuring things out. And I joined tons of classes and workshops, and I learned I was just a sponge. I was just like, everything photography teach me, because I had these 2 little kids, and at the time they were like 2 and 2 days, and so I had these perfect little people at home to practice on. And so I was very lucky that I constantly had people to practice with. But photography was a challenge for me. I mean, it was really hard. It took me longer than it probably should have to figure it all out.
Was there any moments in there that were kind of an aha moment? Like, oh, okay, this is finally starting to make sense.
It wasn't so much an aha moment of like a technique as much as I had this aha moment when I realized I had my priorities wrong with photography. And it was when I had been doing it for probably, and I mean doing it in the sense of like I was obsessed. I was doing a 365. I was taking courses. And I was in the middle of probably like my second or third course, and the instructor had asked us to take a picture of a silhouette. And at the time we were living in Okinawa, Japan. And so I was like, oh, I've got beaches, this silhouette thing. I've got this, And so I asked my husband to help me. And at the time our kids were 3 and 1. And I said, will you come to the beach with me tonight? I'm going to take the silhouette shot. And I had in my head the perfect shot. And I'm also kind of one of those people who wants to like do exactly what the instructor says. I want to get it right, And so we go to the beach and I misjudged the area, and the area we ended up had like trees and bushes, and it's golden hour. So, the sun is setting so fast. I have a 3-year-old and a 1-year-old, and I can't find a place to put her. And I finally find this like 1x1 rock, right? 1x1 foot rock. And I'm like, hey, 3-year-old, stay on this rock and stand really still. And then as if that's not enough, I handed her an umbrella because I thought if I had a prop that they would make the photo that much better.
Of course.
And on the way there, I told her if she was really good, I would buy her ice cream because
that's
not
what you do with kids. Yeah, I get it. Yeah.
And so she's on this rock, like twirling the umbrella and jumping off, and like she's having a great time. I am so frustrated because I can't get my settings right. And the sun is setting fast and you're getting frustrated and flustered. And so I had like my lowest mom moment, and I lost it, and I started yelling at her, and I was like, you're not getting ice cream and you're not listening. And we left, and I'm so mad in the car on the way home. I'm fuming. I get home, I upload all the pictures. I'd taken about 400 pictures and only one of them turned out. And I'm so mad. I'm, complaining to my husband, like, oh, she just wasn't listening, and of course I'm like blaming her, even though really I wasn't the one who could get the shot. And my husband says to me, he's like, do you even like photography? And I'm really thinking like, what? Why would you ask me that? I've spent all this time and money. And he was like, you just don't seem happy, when you're doing it. And that was a huge aha moment for me that I'm like, you're right. Like I do this to capture the kids so that we have these memories and that we can look back on them. But if every memory of mom taking a picture is tied to me yelling or being mad or frustrated, all of a sudden those photos aren't fun to look at anymore.
Right. They're worthless. Yeah.
Yeah. And so that was a huge, and I tell my husband all the time, I'm so glad you said that to me. And it was really hard to hear, obviously. It's hard to hear when you have made mistakes. And that was the moment that I realized like I had to stop trying to get the perfect photo. And every photo I took didn't have to be frame worthy, and it didn't have to follow every rule to a T, and it didn't have to be perfect. But instead it was just like, this is something I get to do with my family, and I can take these pictures and we can look back on them. And a lot of my personal stuff like that I don't share is not technically perfect, like it's a snapshot. It's a moment, but that's the stuff I put in the photo books because those are like really important to me. And so once I let go of that, like pressure I put on myself to have these perfect images, all of a sudden everything started to fall into place a lot easier.
Wow, that was a great story. Thank you so much for sharing that. I can relate a lot of times. You got this idea to go out to take this really good photograph with the kids, and it just doesn't go how you plan, and frustrations can arise. So I totally understand the frustration there. So I want you to walk me through the progression of how Click It Up a Notch came into being. How did that happen?
So it was actually shortly after I had taken that photo, the beach incident. And in fact, for years, that was the logo of my site. It was a silhouette of my daughter holding an umbrella because I wanted to remind myself that that's what photography is about. And when I was teaching it, I wanted to make sure I was getting that point across. And so, and because I was doing a 365, I was posting a photo every day on a personal blog just to share mainly with family, a couple of friends who wanted to follow the kids and see them growing up. And I started to have some of my friends notice around, like July, wait a minute, your photos are getting better. What are you doing? And since I love teaching, I was like emailing all these people like, oh, okay, well, check out this resource and let me explain the exposure triangle and do this and that. And then all of a sudden I had people like emailing me like, I'll just pay you to teach me. And I'm like, no, that's silly. Like I will literally teach you for free. I love this. I'm obsessed. And I got this idea one day because at the time I was following blogs and reading all this stuff. And I remember calling my best friend on the phone and saying, I'm going to start a blog and I'm going to teach people photography. And she's like, okay, and so I like put out on Facebook. I'm not very good at naming things. I don't even name my kids until after they're born. Like I'm not good at it. And I put out on Facebook, like, I'll give someone a $50 Amazon gift card if they can name a site for me.
Oh,
Like
genius. Yeah.
yeah. And so my parents sent me a list of like 40 names. And I paid my mom. Like my mom and dad came up with Click It Up a Notch. At the time they were like obsessed with Emerald, and I think it was like Kick It Up a Notch. Spice,
Right.
I don't know,
Yeah.
something like that. And so they were like, oh, Click It Up a Notch, and I was like, okay. And so it kind of just started in this way of like, I'm just gonna do this to teach my friends because I have friends who are interested, and I think maybe it'll become something. And I knew it would take a lot of time and effort and years of work, but I love teaching. And so that was really exciting to me to have this thing totally to sidetrack, not necessarily photography, but like if you're a stay-at-home mom, you start to kind of feel like a little lost sometimes, because you don't have your job anymore. You don't have people telling you, oh, you're doing a great job, like you don't see these children learning like you did in light bulb moments. Instead, you're changing diapers and making baby food and, all this stuff. And so that was partly another reason that I created it, because I selfishly wanted something for me that I could continue to teach and help people, but I could still stay home with my kids, because that was really important to me, that I wanted to be able to stay home and do that. And so I'm very lucky, and I have the best of both worlds.
I can sympathize with that a lot. I also work from home, and we have a 1-year-old and a 5-year-old. So there's a lot of dirty diapers that I've changed in my life for sure. So the podcast has definitely been something to occupy my time and give me something to look forward to. So,
and no one's thanking you for changing their diaper. Your 1-year-old's not like, Dad, that you nailed it today.
No, never. It's always just screaming in a tantrum for some reason. And she's always happy afterwards, but during the diaper change, it's always like, this is the worst thing that has ever happened in my entire life. Yeah.
I know. This is all brand new.
Yeah. So with Click It Up a Notch, I want to know what it is that what do you focus on? When did it change from a blog of, hey, here's how Aperture works, to what it is today?
So I never dreamed it would be what it is today, and I love it. I'm very fortunate. When I started, it, I thought I'd have this blog, and at the time, like I said, I was reading these other blogs. I noticed that some of them, sold ad space. I mean, this was like 8 years ago, when pre like ad agencies would just throw up ads. Like, you sold like a 125 by 125 square, and you'd sell it for like $25 or something. And I remember seeing this blogger that I loved and counting up her squares, and she had a page on her site to tell you how much each square costs if you wanted to advertise. And I counted up, and I was like, oh my gosh, she's making like several hundreds of dollars by doing this. And I remember saying to my husband, like, can you imagine if people paid to put something on my site and I just get to write and teach, and we could make a couple extra $100 a month? And he's like, that would be crazy. That would be amazing.
That'll never happen.
Yeah, like, let's not get crazy, And so, of course, he's been my biggest advocate. Like, I always have, he's always part of the story that's always like, but like, he really is like a huge supporter. And about almost 3 years after I started the site, I wrote my first ebook, and because people had kind of been asking, and I was like, oh, okay, I'll do that, and so I wrote an ebook, and I didn't know anything about launching or anything. I launched it like 4 days before Christmas, so it was just like, I never even talked about it. Yeah, I mean, I literally just sent an email out that was like, I wrote this book, do you guys want it? And it sold, and my husband and I both were like, oh my goodness, like, that's crazy. And so about a year or two later, I was like, you know what, maybe I'm ready to make a course. And that took me a really long time to make, because I like to say I'm a perfectionist, but in reality, I'm just a procrastinator. And so that took like 8 months to make. And so I realized how much I love the courses and being able to teach a little bit more, because you miss that when you're teaching kids, that you don't have those light bulb moments. Like, yes, as parents, we see them, oh, they learned how to tie their shoe, and that's so incredible. But I love being able to teach people a lot of people things. And so with the courses, I've been really lucky that I have Facebook groups where we do live calls, and we have people, who are like, I get it, and they show like a before and after photo, and it's just like, oh, you got it. You're taking these photos you always wanted. And so now I have an ebook and a course. I'm coming out with another course. It'll be out by the time this goes live. And
Woohoo!
so I know, yay, it's a lot of work. But yeah, so it's turned into this fun thing of like more of a business than a blog. And so that's been a hard transition to go from telling people, oh, I'm a stay-at-home mom who has a blog to like, well, actually, I do run this business, and I stay home. I work from home. And so.
Of course. Who does Click It Up a Notch like really tailor their information for, or your information for?
Yeah, so my main goal is to kind of help the person who is like me. When I started, I thought it would be moms with young children, just like I was. But really, it's anyone who got a DSLR and thought, that's all I needed. And like, I don't want to shame anyone because that's not the point, because I was there. That's what I thought I needed too. And it's that realization of like, oh, there's actually this amazing world of light and composition and exposure triangle and lenses. And so that's my goal, is to help the people who bought a DSLR because they want to capture their everyday life. And I just want to help them get started and do that.
Yeah, that totally makes sense. I love that. I love that you started as an educator, kind of I left because you had to with children, and then fell back in love with educating, but just in a different way. This time it's not screaming little kids, it's frustrated adults, I suppose.
Right.
And when it comes to photography, it can obviously be very, very frustrating when learning something, especially because online there's different avenues, right? There's not only different genres of photography, but there's this push to start a business of photography. Yeah. So sometimes the information can be kind of skewed. As an educator, what is something that you hear falsely preached to new photographers?
So I don't know if it's necessarily preached, but I feel like the thing that I try to get across to people is, I feel like this is the progression I see a lot of people make. You get the DSLR camera, you realize you need to learn more. You learn more, you start taking better pictures, your friends like your pictures, they offer to pay you, and now you own a business.
Right.
And you never even really thought, do I want to own a business? You just kind of were like, oh, someone asked me to photograph their wedding. Oh, someone asked me to photograph their kids. Oh, I'm doing this. And I see it within my own community. And I always tell them, if you want to own a business, that's amazing and it's incredible. And it's a great way to earn a living and do something you love. But there's so much that goes into running a photography business that is past just photography.
Of course.
And I don't speak from my own experience. I have never actually run a photography business because I dabbled in it to see if it was something that I wanted. And so that's what I always try to tell people, like, before you take on the paying clients, and I know that this kind of goes against what a lot of people say, I say just do some shoots for free for your friends and decide if it's something you even love. Because I was the same way. My pictures got better. My friends offered to pay me. And I'm like, I don't know, maybe I want to own a photography business. Let's try it. And so instead of them paying me, I would just say, hey, let me just take pictures of your family and I'm going to gift you the photos. Like, I just want to see if I like it. And I would do a family session and I'd come home and be like, I did not like that. And I mean, I still do it for friends as like a gift to them.
Yeah.
And then, a friend would have a newborn baby. Oh, maybe I want to photograph you. Can I photograph your baby? Oh, I did not like that. Then someone's shooting a wedding. Can I second shoot your wedding? Yeah. Oh, I did not like that. Like, it's just one of those things that like, I am lucky that I was able to do those for free without the pressure and expectations versus like, okay, I'm now doing a family photo shoot and they're not happy with their photos and they paid me and I didn't have a contract and I didn't have a model release, so I can't share their photo. Like there's just so much. You need business license and insurance and all this stuff that I always just try to tell people, if you want to own a photography business, that's great and we will get you there. But if you don't want to, it's okay to be good at something and not charge money for it. Because I feel like a lot of people have like, you have a hobby you're good at, let's figure out a way to make money from it.
Right. Wow. So really being self-aware is the most important thing right there that I took out of that. And I completely agree. I know that a lot of the listeners personally who are just in the Beginner Photography Podcast Facebook group are going to resonate a lot with that, because some people have jobs where they enjoy going. They enjoy the friendship that they have at work. They enjoy the benefits that they get that provides their family. And that's a big thing that people kind of overlook when it comes to starting a photography business. So I think that is a really, really great piece of advice. Be self-aware. And if you don't want to do something, don't do it. Just keep it creative hobby. Does that sound right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And gift it. I mean, that's my big thing. I try to tell people, like, if you want to, like, my best friend had a baby and I was like, can I photograph the birth? And she's like, sure. And I'm like, I just want to gift it for you. And so after she had the baby, when he turned 1, I took all the photos and printed them in a really nice book and just get, obviously I'd given her the pictures before he turned a year. But like, it's one of those things I think people feel like you can gift this gift you have. You don't have to charge money if you don't want to. But the very hard thing is once you do it for a friend and they share about it because they're your best friend or your really close friend, then maybe you're like not as close friend is going to ask for it.
Right.
And it's very hard to say no. And you just kind of have to get into the habit of, actually, this is not something I do as a business. That was just a gift I gave them. I can give you the name of somebody if you're looking to hire someone for your family photos. So.
Smart. Yeah. I've never been in that situation, but I can imagine that could be pretty difficult to be in. Mm-hmm. So that was a good tip.
Thanks.
What do you think is something that like a lot of beginners either overlook or like they want to skip in terms of learning photography?
Oh, that's a tough one. Okay, so what I think, since you asked, I feel like it's very important for people to learn the foundations of photography before they jump into editing. Because I feel like a lot of times people will try to learn them at the same time. And it can be very challenging because learning, if you decide to dive into manual mode, that is a hard thing to get. And then if you're like, okay, I'm also going to learn Lightroom at the same time, that is a hard thing to get. And you don't want to not get that strong foundation in taking really solid photos so that Lightroom is no longer just fixing them, it's making them better. Because if you never learn that foundation, then you're relying on Lightroom to fix your exposure, to fix your white balance. Sure. We all have those photos that need to be fixed. I'm not saying mine never do, right. But the majority of them like come in like pretty solid, and then I can just make it better.
Yes.
And so that's a big thing I think that people, when they start, they're kind of like, I'm going to learn all the things, And so I try to tell people like, focus on manual mode if that's what you want to learn. Learn light, learn composition, learn how to really take the shot. Do that for months until you're really comfortable. And then once you're comfortable, then let's move into editing. And that way it just enhances what you're already doing.
That makes sense. I would assume that would be a very overwhelming experience to try to learn everything about photography all at once, for sure.
Yeah, it's a lot.
When does somebody know when it is time to upgrade their camera? I know that this is a question that you, I'm sure, get asked a lot as somebody who gets started. You have the entry-level camera, and you assume that the bigger, fancier camera is going to take you better photos. Once you learn that it doesn't, why upgrade? And when do you know when to upgrade?
Yeah, so I like to say I have the mom answer to this. Like, it's not the answer you want, but it's the answer I'm going to give. So basically, my advice to people, and it is something I get asked a lot, especially from students in my course, like, okay, I've got this camera, but I want a new one. What should I get? And anytime someone comes to me and says, what camera should I get? I always tell them, you're not ready to upgrade yet. And the reason I know that is because I tell people you should know your camera inside and out. I'm not saying you have to know every setting. You have to have read the manual. I mean, I remember as a kid, my dad would not let us touch anything electronic until we had read the manual. Right. Whereas, like, that doesn't make as much sense with our cameras because photography isn't in the manual, but learning how to use it. But my thing is, like, learn how to use your camera, see the light, use the exposure triangle. And once you start doing that and once you start learning it, you will know what your camera cannot do that a new camera could do. And so if someone's just like, oh, I'm ready to upgrade, I have a budget of this much, what camera should I buy? I'm like, I don't know if you're ready, because if you don't know what your camera can't do that a new camera can, then there's no need to upgrade. But if somebody's like, hey, listen, I feel like I need to, my ISO is really limiting me. I want to be able to work more with low light and all this stuff. This is my budget. Then I'm like, okay, let's look at some options. Now you're looking, at these specific things. That's when I can tell people that, okay, now you're ready to upgrade, because I made the mistake of just purchasing the DSLR my sister had, didn't do any research. Then my friend I purchased a Canon, but my friend who was teaching me was Nikon. And I'm like, well, it would just be easier if I had a Nikon because you're teaching me. And so then I upgraded to that camera, and so I made those mistakes. And so it's definitely one of those, like, do as I say, not as I do.
Of course, yeah. I've been there.
Yeah. But once you figure out your own camera, then you'll be ready to upgrade. But learn your camera first.
Right, right. Oh man. I don't think that that's taught enough. That's a very good point. A lot of people think, like we had just talked about, the bigger camera, the better the image quality. And it's great to hear that you completely remove image quality out of the equation as to whether or not you should upgrade and how to decide what to upgrade. I love that. Do you have one piece of advice that you would give yourself if you could go back in time right to the beginning, that day 2 of your child when you got that brand new camera? If you could tell yourself one piece of information about photography, what would that be?
I actually wrote a letter to myself on my site years after for the same reason that I was like, oh man, I didn't know anything. But the biggest thing, so can I give 2 things?
Yeah, absolutely.
Okay. So the biggest things when I was writing this letter that really stuck out to me is, one, I would say the reason your photos are yellow is because you don't understand white balance. Like, now it seems funny, but at the time, I'm talking months and months of
just
like
yellow photos.
Yeah, I don't get it. And you don't really know what to Google because you don't know. I didn't even know there was such thing as white balance.
Right,
I was just like, they're not right. They're not right. And I didn't even look at them enough to know that it was the yellowness that made them not right. So, I mean, it was really just one of those things that I'm like, I don't know what's wrong with these photos. And then I learned white balance, and I remember being like, my mind is blown. Like, what in the world? So that would be the first thing I would tell myself, learn white balance. And then the second thing I would tell myself is photography is going to be really hard for you, Courtney. It's going to take you months. You are going to have friends who start after you and are going to soar past you. And that's okay, because that's just my journey, And so that was really hard for me when I first started out, because I'm not kidding you. I did have friends who I was helping teach, and then all of a sudden they're like 40 times better than me. And I'm like,
yeah. Wait, what did I say to you that I didn't understand?
I clicked for you. So that was a big thing I would tell myself. It's just, I know there's that saying that's like, don't compare yourself to other photographers, compare yourself to the photographer you were yesterday or a year ago. And that was really important to me, to just slow down and realize, like, you know what, photography is hard, and it took me a little bit longer, and I mean, you'll get it. It's just going to take a while.
Oh, I love that. That's a great personal growth. I think everything that you really talked about today was a lot of introspection, looking at yourself, realizing this journey that you're on, realizing that you are not everybody else, realizing that maybe it's not time to upgrade to this camera. Everything that you said, I think is spot on. And from every article and blog post that I've read on Click It Up a Notch, that comes through. And I think that your readers really understand that. And I think that that's why they connect to you so very well. So, Courtney, I appreciate all the time that you have given me today. Can you let the listeners know right now where they can find you online?
Yeah, so I am at clickitupanotch.com. And also, I have a freebie for any of you guys who want to dive into manual mode. I have some cheat sheets that you can download. I think the link is going to be in the show notes.
It sure will.
Yeah, so you can get some cheat sheets. They're like 4 on a page. You can cut them out. I put like a hole punch in the corner and a D-ring through it. Throw it in your bag. Because it's hard when you're starting out to be. My thing was, I would read things online. I'm like, yes, I get it. My shutter speed should not go below 1/125th. Got it. Go outside to photograph the kids.
It's too dark. I need to open up.
That shutter speed thing. Yeah, you're like, oh man. So these have some little tricks for you to help you remember what you read to when you're actually like out there shooting. And yeah.
Awesome. I will definitely put the link to that in the show notes, and I might have to print up myself a copy and see how this thing looks. That's really exciting. One last question I sometimes ask and sometimes I forget to ask. As a photographer, do you have a favorite social media channel?
Oh, so as a business owner, I love Facebook, even though it's like a love-hate relationship. I mean, who doesn't with Facebook, right? But as a photographer, I really like Instagram. I'm not amazing at posting on there, but that's where I share my personal work. If people want to see it, obviously my site is mainly tutorials. I don't tell a lot of stories. I don't share a lot of our day-to-day. But if people want to see my personal work, then I share that on Instagram because I feel like that's just more of a place to connect with other people. And we have like a community hashtag and you can connect with others. And it's a fun community over there.
I love it. Where can the listeners find you on Instagram?
Click it up a notch on Instagram.
Perfect. Man, you've branded yourself so well. This is all so easy. Well,
literally all the places, click it up a notch.
So easy to find. Courtney, again, thank you so much for coming on and sharing everything that you did. I know that the listeners got a lot out of this one. So again, thank you so much for everything.
Well, thank you. This is so fun.
You know, it's interviews like those that get me really excited for you, the listeners, because Courtney said in there that she is not a professional photographer in the sense that she doesn't own her own studio. She doesn't shoot weddings. She doesn't do anything like that. She got into photography for the passion, which most of us do, right? But then she continued to stay in photography because of the passion. That story that she shared about going down to the beach with her daughter, I've been in that exact same situation, you know, and it hurts to hear that it's like we as parents can put all this weight on outside influences and just lose that fun, that captivating creative outlet of photography just because something small goes wrong. You know, we can't figure this thing out. Whoa, it got really bright outside all of a sudden. So it was great to hear her honesty, and I truly believe that the key takeaway for me was just be self-aware. Know exactly what it is that you're doing in photography. Know why you're doing it, and that will be your North Star. Having that North Star is really going to guide you in the right direction. And if starting a business isn't right for you, then don't do it. You know, just don't. There are so many things that go into running a photography business that even I didn't think about. I thought, hey, I can take a great picture. I can run a photography business. But really, the photography is just kind of the technical aspect of it and has nothing to do with the business. I wish that I could convey that like in a more honest sense that somebody who doesn't own a photography business could understand, because from the outside it looks like, oh, all you got to do is just be good at taking photographs. And man, I really wish that was the case. But if you've been a listener to this podcast, you'll know so many guests have said that running a successful photography business has nothing to do with the quality of your photos. So it was just great, again, to hear Courtney speak her truths, and it was refreshing. It was a great interview because next week we're going the exact opposite direction, and we're having on a business coach. And I got to tell you, it gets a bit heavy on the business side. So if you are thinking about it in the future, it's going to be an interview with a lot of great topics that you probably aren't thinking about now, but are definitely something to be aware of in the future. So you're not going to want to miss it. Also, be sure to check out the show notes for Courtney's episode today, where you can download her freebie, which she talked about in there with her photography cheat sheet, which I've looked at, and it's great. It's really well laid out, and I think that you're going to enjoy it. So that's all that I have for today. I want you to get out there and after downloading her cheat sheet, go outside. Start taking some photos, even if it's just of your kids, even if it's a poor silhouette, even if you think that you know exactly the shot that you want to get and you get out there and it doesn't turn out how you want. I want you to get out there and I want you to capture those photos. I want you to share them with your friends and family because that is what is important, I think, in photography. And keep doing what you love. Be safe. And I love you all. I will see you again next week. Later.
Thank you for listening to today's episode of the Beginner Photography Podcast. Be sure to join the conversations on Facebook and Instagram. And if you want any links or resources we talked about in today's episode, check out the show notes at beginnerphotographypodcast.com. See you again next week.